right, let me start with a question. What is the key to success in your RHCE certification? The simplest answer is really practice, 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 and practice some more. The reason being is that the RHCE exam is a hands-on exam. It's not an exam that you go through a multiple choice question. It's an exam that for you to successfully pass it, you have to sit down in a real environment and work on a server. So if you have never touched a server, chances are that you are not going to make it to this exam. The biggest challenge for students who wants to take the RHCE certification is to find a place where they can do, where they can practice, where they can go through the exercises and get on a server and do everything they need to do. Not because it's hard to put together a lab, but really because there are some components that you will need to successfully complete all your exercises. Specifically, the identity management server. The identity management server is not really an exam requirement, but it's part of the environment that you need to be able to configure your LDAP, do your LDAP configuration, to do and secure your NFS connections and things like that. So this is the biggest challenge. So what we're going to do in this video, we're going to talk about the environment that you will need to successfully practice for your exam. And I'm going to give you a way to do this implementation at as little cost as possible. In my case, I put together my lab with no cost, so it didn't cost me anything. Basically, because you can actually sit down and have there are many applications out there that you can use to virtualize in your own desktop. So if you are an IT specialist, chances are that at least you have a laptop, and just by having a laptop, then you can put together a lab environment fairly quick. If you use Windows, you can use something like VirtualBox, which is free as well. You download it, install it, and you can spin up servers in there. If you're a Mac user, then you can use something like Parallel. That's also free, and it will do what you need to do. And if you're a Linux user, then you can use something like KVM in your laptop and spin up your servers. So for you to be able to successfully go through all the necessary exercises for your RHCE exam, you need 3 servers. The first server is your identity management server, which is the one that we're going to focus on during this video. We are going to go step by step and install and configure your identity management server and have it ready with everything that you need to then sit down and work in your labs. You will also need another 2 servers, server 1 and server 2. Mainly because most of some of the exercises you will need to have a server offering a service like an SMB share or an NFS share, and the other server acting as a client, connecting to it, and you need to have you need to be able to configure it to access a second server. I have some recommendations for the installation of all 3 servers. The first recommendation is to install a full server with a graphical user interface. The reason being is just because that way you don't have to think about all the packages that you will need. The full server with the graphical user interface will have everything included. Some of the tools that you need to go through your lab. Then I recommend you to remove the graphical interface. And the reason being is that since we're going to use servers with very low specifications, so we can run it on our laptops without too much trouble, removing the graphical user interface would take away some of the performance issues that you might face having a graphical interface. A graphical interface is a lot more demanding, it requires more RAM specifically, and as you can see, I'm recommending very low specs, and we're going to talk about the specs in a minute. Then just make sure you can connect to the servers, just so you don't have any issues because of your configuration on your virtualization platform. The fourth recommendation, and this is completely optional, is to eliminate or to disable SE Linux and the firewall from your IPA server. The reason why I recommend to do this is because it's better not to have to troubleshoot your identity management server. So you need to focus on the stuff that you need to do on server 1 and server 2, and restricting your identity management server is not practical. So I would recommend you to remove SE Linux and the firewall on that server. Obviously on server 1 and server 2 you will need SE Linux and the firewall as well, because these are part of the objectives of your exam. If you are configuring a service, you should be able to do the necessary SE Linux configuration and firewall configuration for the service to be available to the clients. As far as specs is concerned, we don't need too much, right? So I'm running all 3 servers with 1 CPU. I'm using 2 gigs of RAM for my IPA server, but you really, have been able to run it, fairly well with 1 gig of RAM, and just a disk of 20 gigs is sufficient. Then server 1 and server 2, they just need 1 gig of RAM and 1 CPU, and that should be enough. Right. So what we do, as we discussed it earlier, that what we will do with this video is just to configure our identity management server, and we're going to do that step by step. For server 1 and server 2, there's really no special requirements. You just need to install, have an installation of CentOS, and that should do it, right? The identity management server is the most critical one for you to be able to do your exercises, because you need it for LDAP and Kerberos authentication. There are particularly 2 objectives for the exam that will require this server, and the first one is to configure the system to authenticate using Kerberos, and to use Kerberos to control access to NFS and network shares. The identity management server will use FreeIPA, which is an open source project sponsored by Red Hat, and then the operating system that we use is CentOS, because it's free. So there is really no difference between Red Hat and CentOS other than the support. So if during the course of the during the other videos I find something that might be different between the 2 operating systems, I'll mention it, but so far I haven't been able to find any issues. So whatever you do in CentOS is exactly the same way you do it on Red Hat. And then the settings that we use for this demo are the ones below. Obviously, these settings are the ones that make sense for this particular lab. Obviously, you can go ahead and adjust these settings to your environment. The IP, chances are the TCP IP settings are different, or you might have a little bit more resources on your laptop. Just feel free to do to adjust it to your needs, right? Okay, so the first step is going to be to do some basic configurations. So we're going to do these 6 configurations just now. So the first one is configure the host name, then we will configure the IP method to manual, then we'll configure the IPv4 address, a default gateway, and we're going to give it a DNS, and then we will reload the interface just to make sure the configurations come back up. For that we can use 2 tools. We can use an MCLI and M2E. For those of you who already took the RHCE exam, you should be very familiar with these 2 tools. But just go through it and talk about the tools anyways, and make sure that you have everything you need to do for this demo. Okay, so for step number 1, which is to change the host name, we can use hostname CTL, and then it's hostname, and we're going to call it ipa.mygsdlabs.local. Alright, that should be it, and then we need to do the IP configuration. Obviously, whenever you can, I always encourage students to use an M2 because basically it's an interface it's as close to a graphical interface as possible. As you can see, you can edit the connection and you can put your settings in there, fairly, really quick without any chances of making any mistakes. But for those of you who like to use an MCLI, which is also a very good tool and is a very good tool to understand well, especially if you do scripting and whatnot. Also for more advanced configurations, for network configurations, NMCLIs will be a tool that will make a lot more sense. And once we get to the advanced networking labs, you will see that we will use more NMCLI than an M2 to create network teaming and bonds and whatnot, right? So let's take a look at the configuration that we have right now. So first of all, let me figure out what are the interfaces that I have. So an MCLI connection show will give me a summary of all my interfaces. And I can see that I have an interface called ENS33. So we're going to work with that interface and we're going to configure it the way we want it. So MCLI connection show and then ENS33. And I want to look at the configuration that's running right now. So for that, I'm going to do IP4. And this is basically the IP settings that the server got from our DHCP server. So I will take this IP. I'm going to pick an IP that's free. In my environment, I can use anything up to 128, but I'm going to configure my IP address as 172.16.19, then .5. That's the one I'm going to use for the IPA server. And server 1 and server 2, would pick two different IP addresses. So NMCLI connection show S33, and obviously for those of you who, like me, who don't really like to remember all the comments that you need to enter, the trick with NMCLI is to take a look at the configuration that we have right now. So if you grep the NMCLI connection show command to the IPv4, it will give you the configurable options that you have for this interface. So as you can see, what we're going to do, we're going to enter an IP address, and then we're going to create a gateway. We're going to do some DNS entries, and then we're going to change the method to manual, right? So, and the way to enter the command is exactly as you see it over there. So for example, for the IP address and MCLI connection modify, we're going to modify the connection. So in S33, IPv4, and then for the IP address is address 172.16.19.5/24. So that's my IP address. For the default gateway is the same way you see over there. Gateway, alright, 172.16.19, and I want to use the same gateway that we have right now because that's the one that's working, right? So it will be .2 in this case. And then for DNS, same way as you over there, DNS. Right? First DNS would be 127.0.0.1, which is the loopback interface for this server. The reason why my primary DNS server is 127.0.0.1 is because once we install our FreeIPA on the server, we will integrate it with DNS, and the DNS will have service records that can be used to find LDAP and Kerberos services on the server. So it's important that the server can we check first on his own DNS server before it goes out to the internet. But obviously we also want to have internet connection, so we can enter a secondary DNS server. We need to add the plus in the DNS as the Google DNS server. Alright, that should do it. So the next step would be to change the method to manual. And this is the last step, because if you try to change your method from auto to manual before you have an IP address already on the interface, the command is going to error out and will tell you that there is no IP address on the interface. So you cannot change the method from auto to manual. So, but since we already created, configured the IP address, we already, we can change it. All right. So let's verify the configuration. So NMCLI connection show in S3, and let's focus the command on the IPv4 configuration. So this configuration that you see right there will be the one that will come up once we reload the interface, or we'll rebounce the interface. So to do that, an MCLI connection down in 33. Now I'm doing this from the console on the server itself, so I'm not going to lose connectivity, but I get in the habit of, whenever I do a configuration on the network interface, of disabling, deactivating it and reactivating it right away and on the same command, just in case, if you're connected by SSH and your connection is down, then you have a problem, right? So it's a good practice just to get the habit of deactivating and reactivating the interface on the same line, right? So an MCLI connection up, so the interface comes back up. So doing that, then we should be alright. So let's verify the IP address that we have right now. So we have 172.16.19.5. Can we see the default gateway? 16.19.2. Yes. And next, let's see if we have access to the internet. That works too. And then let's see if we have access to resolve names, and that works as well. All right, so our first step, which is the network configuration, is completed. The next step will be to install the IPA server. And again, right, we need to install some dependencies, and this is the list of dependencies that we have up there. We need to install the IPA server, and then we have to install the IPA server DNS. We have to install bind, because we will integrate DNS with IPA, so we need bind to access the DNS server, and then the bind DynDB LDAP package. So you don't have to memorize it. It's going to be on the step-by-step instructions that come with this video. But let's go ahead and get those dependencies in, right? All right. So let me clean the screen a bit. So, yum install IPA server, and then IPA server DNS. We need bind, and then we need bind dash DynDB LDAP -y, and so as you can see, it's going to go and install quite a few packages. So at this point, I'm going to pause the video and then resume once this is done. Okay, so we finished installing the dependencies. So the next step right now will be to install the IPA server. So to do that, we can run the IPA server install command. So let's do that right now. So IPA server install. The first question is, do you want to configure integrated DNS? Yes, we want that. And then the host name, we'll keep it the same way it is. We will use the domain name as my gsdlabs.local, and the real name as well, my gsdlabs.local. And then we set a password. I normally keep these passwords real simple. We need a directory manager password and the admin password, and I use password just to make sure that I'm not going to forget it or anything like that, right? I remember, I don't want to do any troubleshooting on the IPA server. Do we want forwarders, right? This is for this server this is going to configure bind to forward internet names to an external DNS server. So we want to do that. Obviously, from the resolvers file, we have 127, and then we have 808.808.8. We don't want to use 127, so let's say no here, and we will create the first one is 8.8.8.8, and then we will use 8.8.4.4, right? And that's it. With those two forward, they should be sufficient. Do we want to check for missing reverse zone? We haven't created one yet. So the reverse zones are going to be used to resolve an IP address into a name instead of a name into an IP address. So at this point, the system is going to check and figure out all IP addresses that we have on the server, and it's going to create a zone for that particular subnet, right? So create a reverse zone for 172.16.19.5, yes, and it creates the zone 19.16.172. And then there is the 122.1, which is a bridge interface that I have on this server. And then it's asking me if I want to continue with that configuration that we just entered. So at this point, you just review, make sure that everything is there, and everything is correct. Then say yes, and that's it. So now this process takes a little bit of time. So let's pause the video and then come back when it's done. Okay, so the installation of the IPA server completed, and it actually tells you the next steps, right? So the next steps will be to open some of the firewall ports that you need to access the server, and to obtain a Kerberos ticket for your admin account, which are, these are the next steps that we have highlighted here as well. So let's take care of that. For the firewall configuration, we use firewall CMD. Then add service HTTP first, then we need HTTPS, then we need LDAP, LDAP-S, and then we need Kerberos, we need DNS, and NTP. And now we reload the file for the configuration to take effect. Okay, so that should be it. The next step will be to create and catch a Kerberos ticket for the admin account. So key init admin. We enter the admin password that we entered during the installation, and that's it. So we have already the IPA server installed, configured, and then we configure the file to allow all the clients to access the server, and we created and cached the Kerberos ticket for the IPA admin account. The next step will be to create our first user. So let's go ahead and do that. To create the first user, we need to use IPA user add, and then LDAP user 1. Right, name so 1, last name Hernandez, and that's it. We have the user created. Let's create a password for that user. So IPA wd LDAP user 1, sorry, IPA. And then we give it a very simple password. In my case, the password is password. And okay, so the next step, now that we have the user created and we have already a password for the user, the next step is to create a folder for the home directories for this user that we can later on publish by NFS. This is for us, to be able to use AutoMount or AutoFS together with our LDAP configuration and make this the home directory of the LDAP user available to from the other servers. So for that, let's just create the directory. Now we're gonna call it NFS home. LDAP user 1. And then let's modify the user to use that home directory. So for that, we use IPA user mod for modify home DRR, and then NFS home LDAP user 1. The user is LDAP user 1, and now we have the home directory as NFS home LDAP user 1. So the next step will be to publish the entire NFS home folder through NFS, right? So for that, we have to configure the exports file. And by the way, we talk a lot about NFS, but for now, this is the configuration that we need for this, for what we're doing. So the first thing is to enter the directory name, NFS home, and then we enter the options. So the first thing is from where this directory can be accessed. So we put star, so we allow we make the directory accessible to everyone. And then read and write, we make it read and write. And then security, we will use sys security, and then KRB5, then KRB5I, KRB5P, and that should do it. The next step is to enable NFS. So system ctl enable NFS and start it. And configure the firewall to allow NFS, right? So firewall cmd, sorry, NFS. Let's just reload the firewall for the configuration to take effect. And that's it. So now we have the user created. We created the home directory, and we publish the home directory by NFS. The next step would be to create an FTP site. To create an FTP site where we can publish the CS certificate for the IPA server. So for that, we're going to use vsftpd. So just go ahead and do that. So yum install sorry. Alright, package is already installed. So let's enable started. And now we need to configure the firewall as well to allow FTP, right? Firewall CMD. Let's just reload the firewall. Okay, so having the FTP site ready, now what we need to do is just copy the CS certificate to the public directory for the FTP server. So the CS certificate is on the etc IPA folder. Let's go CS cert. And then we need to move it to var, FTP, and then public. All right, so let's take a look quickly at the that file quickly. So if you see the context is public context, right? You just want to make sure that the SLN is not going to stop me from actually being able to download that file, right, by FTP. So far that's it as far as configuring the FTP site to publish your CS cert is concerned, and now the next step, the final step, will be to configure your server 1 and server 2. And the configuration that you have to do is really minimum. You just need to create a host name, give these servers IP addresses, although it's not a requirement. You can leave it, the servers using DHCP, but obviously, if you want to have a lot more control over your server, just assign static IP, verify there's connectivity, and then just play with your lab. When I started putting my lab and getting ready to start getting ready for my RHCE exam, I did this process multiple times. Just I really wanted to be familiar with FreeIPA, even if it's not a requirement for the exam, but just I really wanted to be familiar, basically because I didn't want anything to obstruct me from doing all the practice that I need to do, right? So I encourage you to do this several times. Just make sure that you are very familiar with your environment, so you can so you don't have to troubleshoot your lab, right? So you can troubleshoot what the tasks that you're doing. Okay, so other than that, you should be ready. So thanks for watching. I hope this video was informative to you. Thank you.